The bricks were still warm from the kiln when the men began stacking them toward the sky, and a dark-handed king stood at the base of it all. His name meant one thing: we will rebel. This was Shinar, a few generations after the flood, when the whole earth still spoke a single tongue, and one man had learned he could bend other men to his will. Picture the plain at dusk, the kilns breathing heat into the evening, rows of clay bricks cooling in the last light, and the black bitumen, the slime they used for mortar, glistening wet between the courses where the masons had just laid them. You could smell it, tar and river mud and wood smoke. A line of men passed bricks hand to hand up a ramp of packed earth, and not one of them stopped to rest, because the king at the bottom did not stop watching. His name was Nimrod. Before you decide he was a monster, come stand in the mud beside him and watch how the first empire on earth actually began. I have stood on ground like that. Years ago, in the valley of the two rivers, I put my hand on a mound of broken brick that was old before Abraham was born, and I felt the same tar still holding it together, hard as the day it was poured. Whatever else this story is, believe me, it is not a fairy tale. Men built this. One man made them build it. Now here is where the record starts, and I want you to read it slow, because most Bibles run right past it. Genesis chapter 10, verses 8 through 10. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, the beginning of his kingdom. Sit with that phrase a second. That is the first time the word kingdom appears anywhere in your Bible, and it belongs to this man, not to a Hebrew, not to a European, to the son of Cush, the son of Ham. An African line stated plainly right there on the page. The first empire in the whole story of the world was a black man's empire, and it was mighty and it was real. I believe this. I have sat with it a long time, and I will tell you honestly, what I could not see for years was how it ended, and I am not going to hand you that yet. Come back with me first to the beginning, before the tower went up, before the tongues broke apart, when the whole earth was still one people with one language and one very ambitious king. Watch how it started. To understand Nimrod, you have to go back to the water. Not long before him, a handful of generations, no more, the whole earth had been wiped clean, and 8 souls had stepped off a wooden boat onto a drying world. Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives. That was the seed of everyone alive. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And out of those 3 families, the earth was meant to fill up again, slow and spreading, the way God had told them plainly when they came down off the mountain. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Not gather, fill, go out, spread. The whole earth was standing empty and washed, waiting for them to walk into it. Genesis chapter 10 is where the record keeps the accounting of who went where. Scholars call it the Table of Nations, and I will be honest with you, I taught history for 30 years, and for most of them, I read that chapter the way most people do, as a long list of hard names you skim to get to the good part. I was wrong to rush it. Took me years to slow down and see what it actually is, because that list is not filler. It is a map. It is the family tree of the entire human race, branch by branch, every nation on the earth, traced back to one of 3 brothers off that boat. And if you follow one branch down, the line of Ham, Noah's second son, you come to a man named Cush, and then the record says it, plain as a birth certificate, and Cush begat Nimrod. One verse, one father, one son. Nothing else about the mother, nothing about the childhood. Just a name dropped into the middle of the genealogy, and then the whole chapter changes tone around it. And here is the detail you must not walk past, because everything that follows depends on it. In that same stretch of the record, it says the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Nobody had scattered yet. There were no nations yet, not really. Only families, all descended from the same 8 people, all still speaking the same words, all still able to understand one another perfectly. Whatever one man could talk the rest into, the rest could do, because there was not a language barrier anywhere on the planet. One tongue, one people, one unbroken human family. Hold that picture in your mind, a young, empty, washed world, and everyone on it able to speak to everyone else, because that is the raw material Nimrod is about to pick up and use. Now let me tell you who Cush was, because the Bible does not leave it vague, and I am not going to leave it vague either. Cush is the old name for the land south of Egypt, the kingdoms of Nubia, the upper reaches of the Nile, the country the Greeks and everyone after them would come to call Ethiopia. When your King James Bible says Cush, or when it says Ethiopia, it is pointing at Africa, at a dark-skinned people. And the record is not shy about it, not once. Cush is named again and again, all through the scriptures, from this genealogy in Genesis clear out to the prophets, and it always means the same ground and the same people. I did not learn that from a book. I learned it standing in the Cairo Museum, and later on the Upper Nile itself, looking straight at the stone faces of Cushite kings, carved into black granite, broad features, tight curls cut right into the rock, the unmistakable likeness of African men who ruled real and mighty kingdoms. And years after that, in a rock-hewn church in the highlands of Ethiopia, an old deacon let me hold a manuscript written in the ancient Ge'ez script, a book older than the King James by centuries, that had kept these very names and these very stories alive across 1,000 years, when half the Western world had let them slip. I held that evidence in my own 2 hands. The lineage is not something I am pressing onto the text. It is sitting right there in the text, and it is confirmed in the ground and in the manuscripts. So when I tell you that Nimrod, son of Cush, son of Ham, was an African king, understand, I am not reaching for anything. I am only reading you the line the way it was written. Now here is a truth I did not fully appreciate until I had spent years walking dig sites and museum halls, and it is worth stopping on before we go a single step further. A shared language is the most powerful building material any civilization has ever possessed. More than brick, more than bronze, more than the gold in the vault. Stone raises a wall. A common tongue raises a nation. Everything human beings accomplish together, all of it, runs on it. The passing of a plan from one mind into the next. The handing down of a craft from a father to his son. The aiming of 10,000 separate hands at one single design. Take the shared word away, and the 10,000 hands become 10,000 strangers standing in the dirt. That one unbroken human language, spoken across the whole young earth, was the true foundation underneath everything Nimrod was about to build. Deeper than the brick, older than the tower, the thing that made a single empire even thinkable. Hold on to that and hold it tight, because it is going to matter enormously by the end of this story. When God finally moves against the tower, he will not lay a hand on a single brick of it. He will not topple one stone. He will reach instead for the words, and in reaching for the words, He will take hold of the one thing holding the whole rebellion together. And out of that African line came a man who would do something no human being before him had ever done. Because up to Nimrod, the record gives you exactly what you would expect of a young world. Fathers and sons, births and long lives and deaths, families quietly spreading a little farther out with each generation. It is calm, it is ordinary. Then his name lands in the middle of it, and the temperature of the whole story changes. Something new is coming onto the earth, and it will not be another family. It will be an empire. But before an empire could rise, that whole one-tongued world had to do the one thing God had told them not to do. They had to stop spreading out and gather. And the record tells us exactly where they gathered and exactly what dangerous new thing they learned to make when they got there. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. That is the sentence, 8 words in the King James, and they are the hinge the whole story swings on. Because up to that point, nobody in the record had ever been called mighty. Men had been righteous, like Noah, or wicked, like the generation of the flood. They had been long-lived, walking the better part of 1,000 years. But mighty, powerful over other men, that word had not existed in the human story yet. Nimrod is the very first man the Bible ever describes as strong the way a ruler is strong. The Hebrew word underneath it is gibber, and you need to hear both sides of that word, because it carries them both. A gibber is a champion, a warrior, a man of tremendous capacity. The word gets used later for David's mightiest soldiers, the elite of the elite, but it also carries a shadow. A gibber is a man who imposes himself, who takes ground, who bends other men to his will, and makes them fall in line behind him. And the record says Nimrod began to be that. Began. As though something started with him that had simply not been in the world before. Think about it plainly. Before Nimrod, a man was the head of his own tent, his own family, and no more. After Nimrod, one man could be the head of thousands. He is the first strong man in the history of the world, and every strong man since, every conqueror, every emperor, every dictator who ever made a crowd chant his name has been walking down a road that this African king cut first. And I want to be careful right here, because it would be so easy to turn him into a snarling cartoon. And I have done exactly that in my own head for years. Read the record plainly, though. In this verse, the text does not call him evil. It calls him mighty. It calls him a builder. It says the beginning of his kingdom was great. Whatever else he was, the man was capable, genuinely gifted, genuinely able. Men followed him because, at least at first, he was worth following. And I have come to believe that is the most sobering part. The most dangerous ruler in the world is never the fool. The fool cannot gather anyone. It is the gifted one, the one with real vision and real strength, who points all of it in the wrong direction. Nimrod was that man. His gift was real. That is precisely what made him so dangerous. Then comes the line that has puzzled honest readers for thousands of years. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And I have to make an admission to you, because it is the truth. For most of my life, I read that as a compliment. A great outdoorsman, a blessed provider, a man skilled at bringing down game. It took me years, and a lot of slow reading, and more than a few conversations with people who knew the old languages, to see how much I had been missing. Because think about what a hunter actually does. A hunter tracks. A hunter drives the prey where he wants it. A hunter takes life for a purpose. And the oldest readings of this passage, the ones the Ethiopian tradition preserved, the ones the ancient rabbis wrestled over, do not picture Nimrod chasing deer across a field. They picture him hunting men, trapping them, driving them, conquering them, making the craft of war and domination into an art, so that he was the first person on earth to turn other human beings into prey. And then that little phrase hanging on the end, before the Lord. In the Hebrew, it can be read two completely opposite ways. It can mean in God's favor, done in his sight and with his blessing. Or it can mean in God's face, right in front of him, in open defiance, daring heaven to watch. Same words, opposite meanings. And I have come to believe the record left it standing on that knife's edge deliberately, so that you would have to stop and decide which Nimrod you are actually looking at. Here, though, is what is not in any doubt at all. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. 4 cities, 1 king over all of them. The first kingdom named anywhere in the entire Bible. Sit with the weight of that. Before Nimrod, you have households and clans. Now, suddenly, you have a capital and satellite cities, all under a single crown, all on that same rich plain between the 2 rivers. This is the birth of the city, the birth of the state, the birth of centralized political power on the face of the earth. And every one of those 4 names is a real place that archaeologists have pulled out of the Iraqi desert with their own hands. Babel is Babylon. Erech is the great city the diggers call Uruk, one of the oldest cities ever unearthed anywhere. The place where some of the very first human writing was found pressed into clay. I have walked museum halls lined floor to ceiling with what came up out of that ground. This is not legend, and it is not folklore. This is the foundation layer of recorded human civilization, and the Bible, without apology, sets a single African king down at the very bottom of it. And a man who can build 4 cities and rule them all as one has learned a terrible lesson. He can build anything. That is exactly where the danger turns lethal. Because the record is about to show us what a man like that decides to build when he stops looking out across his cities and starts looking up past the rooftops, past the plain, toward heaven itself. Now think carefully about what it actually takes to rule 4 cities at once. Not to live in them, to rule them. To pull thousands of families who since the dawn of the world had answered to no one but their own father, under a single crown, and get all of them pointed the same direction at the same time. That had never happened before on the earth. Not once. Before Nimrod, the human race was a wide scatter of households and clans, each one its own small kingdom, each father the only authority his children ever knew. Nimrod took that scatter and forged it into a state. 1 king, 1 will, 1 plan that everyone underneath had to serve, whether it was their plan or not. And here is the thing I most want you to see, because it is the quiet heart of this entire story, and it is the thing most people read straight past. In all of it, the cities, the crown, the gathering of the people, there is not 1 word about God, not a prayer, not an altar, not a sacrifice, not a single line where anyone stops to ask heaven what they ought to do. For the first time in the record, you are watching human beings organize themselves on a grand scale, pooling their strength, their labor, their genius, their ambition, entirely on their own account, with no reference whatsoever to the God who had just carried their own grandparents through the flood on a boat. This is unity, real, powerful, genuinely impressive human unity, and it is aimed at nothing higher than itself. That is the birth of something the world has never once been free of since: concentrated power, 1 man at the top. and a whole people below him, held together by a shared ambition, standing in the place where shared worship used to be. And they had just invented the perfect tool for it. "Remember the brick. Let us make brick," they said, "and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. I told you to read that like a historian, and here is why it matters so much more than it looks. Out on that flat river plain, there is no stone, none. In the mountains, a man builds with the rock God already set in the ground. But on the plain of Shinar, there is only mud as far as you can walk. So they learned to take that mud, shape it in molds, and burn it in kilns until it came out harder than the mountain stone they had left behind, and then bind it together with bitumen, the black tar that seeps up out of that very ground, waterproof and unyielding. Suddenly men could raise a permanent thing, a lasting thing, a monument meant to outlive them out of nothing but earth and fire and their own two hands. Do not miss what that did to the human heart, because this is the real invention, and it is not the brick. For the first time, men did not have to take what God's world handed them. They could manufacture their own foundation, their own permanence, their own security, molded and fired and stacked by their own labor, owing nothing to anyone above them. And I will tell you what 40 years of reading and teaching has taught me. A people who have learned they can build their own security will, sooner or later, and always, decide they do not need anybody else's, not even God's. The brick was never just a building material. It was a brand new idea about who, exactly, was in charge of the earth. And on that idea, that single dangerous idea, Nimrod was about to raise the boldest thing the human race had ever dared to attempt. And now the record slows all the way down and lets the builders speak for themselves. And what comes out of their own mouths is the whole story in a single breath. Genesis chapter 11, verse 4. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Read that slowly with me, because every single phrase in it is a confession. Let us make us a name. Not let us honor the name of God. Let us make our own. A name, in the old world, was not just what people called you. A name was your reputation, your legacy, your weight in the world, your way of saying, "We mattered, we were here, we were great, and every generation that comes after us will have to know it." That is the engine humming underneath this entire project. Not shelter, not survival, not even safety, when you get right down to it. Glory. They wanted to be remembered, and they wanted to be remembered on their own terms, by their own effort, to their own credit, forever. And then listen to the fear sitting right underneath the pride, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Here is the part that stops me every time I read it. God had told mankind, in plain words, to fill the earth, to spread out, to scatter, to go and possess the whole washed and empty world. And they heard that command, and instead of obeying it, they were afraid of it. So they built to defy it. The tower was not only ambition, the tower was disobedience, with a foundation poured under it. It was men looking at the one thing God had told them to do and answering, "No, we will not go where you sent us. We will stay right here, together, on this plain. And we will make ourselves so great and so mighty that nothing, not even you, can ever move us." Now look hard at the tower itself, a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. People picture a silly staircase to the sky, a cartoon ladder, as if these were simple men who honestly believed they could climb up and knock on God's front door. They were not simple men. I have stood at the foot of what is left of these towers, out in the Iraqi desert. The ziggurats, the archaeologists call them, great stepped mountains of that same burned brick, rising in terrace after terrace, with a shrine set at the very top. They were not trying to physically bump their heads on the clouds. They were building a holy mountain by hand. A man-made high place, a throne room in the sky, poured and fired by human labor, where heaven was supposed to come down and keep an appointment on ground that men had made and men controlled. That is the ambition. And it is deadlier than the cartoon. Not a ladder to sneak into heaven, a summit to summon it. A place where man would set the terms and God would be expected to show up. And a king who could rally an entire one-tongued world to raise a thing like that had, whether he ever understood it or not, just picked a fight with the one person in all of existence who was higher than the top of his tower. And that fight was about to be answered, not from the plain, but from above it. Come back to the king's own name for a moment, because the record hid a warning inside it, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Nimrod. In Hebrew, that name sits right on top of the verb marad, to rebel, to revolt. We will rebel. Now, I am careful with this, the way a historian has to be careful, because I cannot prove to you that his mother stood over his cradle and named him Defiance on the day he was born. Names are slippery things across that many centuries, but here is what I can tell you. The ancient readers heard it, and they heard it loud. The old Ethiopian traditions, the rabbis writing in the centuries that followed, the historians of the early church, they read that name, and they read this tower, and they set the two side by side, and they came to the same conclusion. This was the man who led the rebellion, the first organized human uprising against heaven in the history of the world, and a king with the word revolt stitched into his very name, standing at the front of the column. And whether that name was handed to him at birth or earned across a lifetime, the record shows you a man behaving in exact accordance with it. Think again about when all of this is happening. This is the world so soon after the flood, after God had drowned an entire generation for its violence and corruption, and then, in mercy, hung his bow in the cloud and made a promise never to do it that way again. The story of the water was not ancient history to these people. Their own grandfathers had lived through it. And here, in the shadow of that fresh and terrible mercy, is a king gathering up the survivors' grandchildren to raise a monument whose entire message is, "We do not need you." That is not ignorance. Ignorance can be forgiven. That is defiance done in broad daylight, in the full sight of the God who had just spared their whole bloodline. And then the record does something that ought to raise the hair on your arms, because it lets you hear God's own assessment of exactly how dangerous this had become. Genesis 11, verse 6. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." Read that again, and read it carefully, because it is not what most people assume. That is not God up in heaven, nervous, worried he might actually lose to a pile of bricks. Not for a second. That is God telling you the plain truth about what human unity becomes when it is aimed away from him. One people, one language, one shared will. There is almost no limit to what a race like that can accomplish. And that, exactly that, is the whole problem. Because the thing they had imagined to do, the thing all that unity was bending toward, was to make themselves into gods and shove the real God out of his own sky. Their strength was real, their genius was real. Their unity was the single most powerful force yet seen anywhere on the young earth. and every last ounce of it was being poured in the wrong direction at the command of a gifted king whose name meant rebel. And I want you to feel the timing of it, because the timing is where the real offense lives. This was not a people who had never once heard from God. This was not some far-off tribe that had never been given a word. Their own grandfathers had ridden out the end of the world in a wooden box, while every living thing outside it drowned. The memory of the water was still fresh, 1 lifetime old, maybe 2, no more than that. They had heard it firsthand, from the mouths of men who were actually there, exactly what it costs when the earth fills up with human pride and violence. And God, standing on the far side of that judgment, had not come to them again in wrath. He had come down in mercy. He set his bow in the clouds where every eye could see it. He made a covenant, never again like this. And he told them, plainly and kindly, what to do with the second chance he was handing them. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, go and live. They took that mercy in both hands, and they used it to build a tower against the one who gave it. And that, right there, is the part I have sat with the longest, out at those ruins and at my own kitchen table. It is not the rebellion of people who knew no better. It is the rebellion of people who had just been spared. Pride arriving hot on the very heels of grace. And if you have lived any real length of years, you have watched that same thing happen in smaller shapes than a tower. You have seen the man who survives the accident that should have killed him, and within a season is running harder and colder from the God who carried him through it than he ever ran before. You may have been that man. I have had seasons of being him. Babel is simply that ancient, familiar human turn, written out across a whole civilization in fired brick and black tar. So understand what the tower really was, underneath all the engineering. It was never, at bottom, a serious plan to physically climb up into God's living room. These were not fools, and I will not insult them by pretending they were. It was a monument, a statement carved into the skyline, a throne for a name. Every terrace they added said the same sentence a little louder than the last. We are enough. We are mighty. We will make ourselves a kingdom that the heavens themselves will be forced to reckon with. And that makes it the first kingdom in the history of the world built not merely apart from God, and not merely forgetting God, but deliberately, ambitiously engineered against him, with the very best skill and unity and vision the age had to offer, all of it turned like a weapon toward the sky. And a monument like that cannot go unanswered. You cannot raise a fist that high and expect heaven to simply look the other way and let it stand. The king had made his move. He had gathered the whole earth, invented the permanence, poured the foundation, and started the tower climbing. And now, for the very first time in this entire account, the record lifts its eyes off the plain, off the brick, off the shouting crews, off Nimrod himself, and turns them upward to see what God is going to do about it. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. Stop on that verse, because it is one of the quietest and one of the sharpest lines in all of Scripture, and most people read right over it. And the Lord came down. Here is a tower whose top was meant to reach unto heaven, the tallest thing human beings had ever raised, the summit of the whole age's genius and pride, and the record tells you that in order to even see it, God had to come down. Do you feel the size of that? From where the throne of heaven actually sits, their mightiest mountain of brick, the thing they had bankrupted a civilization to build, was so far below notice that the Almighty had to stoop down out of glory to find it at all. It is holy irony, and it is the exact truth about every proud thing men have ever built to their own name. What looks colossal from down on the plain is barely a scratch in the dirt from up on the throne. And between you and me, I have come to believe God wrote it in those words on purpose. Notice what he does not say. He does not say the tower threatened him. He does not say it nearly reached, that it came dangerously close, that heaven had a scare. He says he came down to see the thing which the children of men builded. And even that word, children, has a strange gentleness folded into it, the way you would speak of little ones who have gotten hold of something dangerous while they thought no grown-up was watching. The whole verse deflates the tower without God ever raising a hand against it. Man's highest reach is heaven's low stoop. That is the measure of it, and it never changes. And then heaven speaks, and it speaks in a voice you ought to recognize. Verse 7. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Let us go down. Do you hear the echo in it? Down on the plain, the men had said, go to, let us build, let us make us a name. And now, from above, the very same words come turned back on them. Go to, let us go down. It is almost an answer handed back in their own phrasing. And do not miss that plural, either. Let us. It is the same mysterious us that spoke at the very beginning, when God said, let us make man in our image. Heaven is not panicking here. Heaven is deliberate. This is a council in session, not a scramble for the exits. A measured, chosen, sovereign response, decided with perfect calm. And I want you to notice who is entirely absent from this scene, because the silence is deafening once you hear it. Nimrod, the mightiest man on the face of the earth, the architect of the whole rebellion, the king with revolt stitched into his very name. And when heaven finally convenes its council to answer the tower, he is not addressed at all. God does not debate him. God does not threaten him. God does not send him a prophet, or a sign, or a warning, or so much as speak his name aloud. The record simply lifts right past him, up to the council above the clouds, as though the single greatest king the world had yet produced were not even worth one direct word from the throne. Sit with that a moment, because it is not a comfortable thought for anyone who has ever wanted to make himself great in this life. All of Nimrod's might, all his cities, all his gathered thousands, all the dizzying height of his tower, and from heaven's side of the sky, none of it rated a personal reply. Heaven answered the tower. It never once bothered to answer the man. And there is a warning folded into that silence for every proud heart in every age, my own most certainly included. And now watch what mercy looks like when it comes wearing the face of judgment, because this is the part I most misread for most of my life. Think hard about what God did not do. The last time the earth had filled up with proud violence like this, he had sent water and ended every soul outside the boat. He had every right to reach for it again. The bow in the cloud had only promised no more floods. It had never promised no more judgment of any kind. But he did not reach for the flood. He reached for their words. He did not destroy the builders. He confounded the building. He aimed the smallest possible blow at the one precise joint that held the whole rebellion together, their single shared language. And he let the tower itself stand right there, unfinished and harmless, a silent monument to something other than the glory they had planned for it. Because the scattering was never only a punishment. Go back and remember the exact command they had been running from. Fill the earth. God had told them to spread out, to go, to possess the whole washed world, and they had refused and built a tower for the express purpose of never having to obey it. So when he broke their language and drove them apart across the face of the earth, he was not merely stopping their rebellion. He was accomplishing, through their scattering, the very thing they had defied him to avoid. The scattering that had terrified them so badly, they built a tower against it. That was the scattering he had asked of them lovingly from the very beginning. He got them up off that plain and out into the whole wide-open, waiting earth, which is precisely where he had wanted his children all along. Even here, in the very middle of judgment, he was still moving them toward life and not away from it. That is the God we are dealing with in this story. Even his confounding is a form of care. Even when he comes down to scatter, he is scattering seed. Now picture the morning it actually happened, because the record wants you to see it, not just file it. The plain at first light, the tower throwing its long shadow clear across the brickyards. The crews climbing the earthen ramps the way they had every single day, calling out to one another, the way working men always do on a job. Pass it up, hold that, higher, more mortar over here. And then, somewhere between one word and the very next, the sounds stop meaning anything at all. A foreman shouts a familiar order, and the man standing right beside him hears only noise coming out of his mouth. A father calls his own son by name, and the boy just stares back at him. No idea on earth what was asked. Up on the high scaffolding, a hand reaches out for a brick that never arrives. Because the two men who had passed bricks hand to hand since they were boys together are suddenly, impossibly, strangers, with not one shared word left between them. There is no announcement, no thunderclap, no fire, just a whole city of people opening their mouths at once and discovering that the person next to them has become a foreigner overnight. I have tried for years to imagine the actual sound of it. Thousands of human voices rising all at once in confusion and fear across that plain, and not a single one of them able to answer another. Understand exactly what that did. The work did not get halted from the outside. The workers got divided from the inside out. The tool that God reached for was not a weapon aimed at the tower. It was a fracture line run straight through the people. And the record gives that day a name that has never once left our language in all the centuries since. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Babel, it means confusion. Chew on the irony of that until you taste it. The city that set out with one burning goal to make itself a name that would ring down through every age, got its name all right. But it was not the name it wanted. The proudest capital of the first empire on earth is remembered forever in 100 tongues as the place where human words themselves came apart. You still carry a piece of that morning in your own mouth, and you can still see the shape of that one morning everywhere you turn, if you know to look for it. There are something on the order of 7,000 languages spoken on the earth right now, and every last one of them traces back, in the end, to the day the words broke apart on that plain. Every border ever drawn between two peoples, every translator ever hired, every treaty lost in translation, every war half-started over a single misunderstood word. Every time two human beings have stood face to face, wanting with everything in them to understand each other, and simply could not. All of it began right here, at Babel, on the morning God came down. We live, every single one of us, downstream of that day. The world you were born into, carved up into nations and tongues, and peoples who cannot always hear one another across the fence, is not the world as it first was. It is the world God made when he came down to answer one proud king's tower. I taught world history for 30 years, and I will tell you plainly, you cannot rightly understand a single map hanging on the wall of any classroom on Earth without first understanding this one morning on the plain of Shinar. When you say something has turned to babble, to confusion, to noise, you are speaking Nimrod's judgment without even knowing it. And once the words were gone, the empire simply could not hold. Think it all the way through with me, because this is the mechanism of the whole collapse. Everything Nimrod had built, every city, every crew, every stone of his power, stood on exactly one foundation. One people who could all understand one another perfectly, and therefore all be aimed at one single goal by one single voice. Take that away, and there is nothing left in his hands to command. You cannot rule what you cannot speak to. You cannot organize thousands of men into one unified will when they can no longer share one unified sentence. And so it came apart along the fault lines of language. The families that could still understand each other drew instinctively together and pulled away from the ones they suddenly could not. And they packed up their households and they left, north and east and west, out across the plain and into the empty, waiting earth, carrying their children and their tools and their new and separate tongues, doing at last, in a single week, the very thing God had commanded from the start. And the tower stood there behind them, half-built and going nowhere, its top nowhere near the heaven it was promised, abandoned in the silence of 100 languages that could no longer say a word to one another. The mightiest man on the face of the earth, the first king the Bible ever names, the builder of the first empire, the strong man every strong man since has imitated, stood on that plain and watched the one thing he had, built everything else upon, dissolve in the space of a single morning, and there was not one brick he could stack, not one order he could give, not one thing in all his power that could stop it. Whatever Nimrod was, and he was mighty, he had just run headlong into the hard edge of what a man is actually allowed to be. He had found the limit, and that limit is the entire point of this story. The thing the record has been quietly walking you toward since the very first warm brick cooling on the plain. Because now, at last, we come to the question I told you I was holding back. After all of it, the cities and the crown and the tower and the name he built to outlast the ages, what actually became of Nimrod and his empire, and that name he wanted so badly, the whole world would never forget. Here is the answer, and it is heavier than any sentence God could have spoken out loud against him. He wanted a name. That was the whole ambition, from the first brick to the last terrace. Let us make us a name, something the world would speak with awe forever. So walk it forward with me, slowly, all the way down the centuries. What is the name of that city today? Babel. And what does the word Babel mean in the languages that scattered off that very plain? Confusion, the exact word the king built a tower to earn, became, in tongue after tongue after tongue, the world's own byword for the single biggest collapse in human history. To this day, when people in a dozen different languages want to describe noise, breakdown, a grand project that came apart in chaos and crossed wires, they still reach, most of them with no idea why, for his word, Babel. He got his name exactly as he asked. It became the name of failure itself. God did not have to erase Nimrod from memory. He did something far more devastating. He let the man's own monument become his epitaph, and he let the man's own chosen name become the world's word for ruin. And that, right there, is the deeper thing I have come to see standing at those ruins. With the wind moving low over the broken brick and the sun going down red behind the mounds, God never once raised a weapon against Nimrod. Go back and check it. There is no fire in this story, no flood, no lightning splitting the tower, no plague, no army. The record does not even bother to tell us the hour that Nimrod died. It simply lets the empire fall of its own dead weight the moment God quietly withdrew the single thing that had been holding it up. The mightiest kingdom on the face of the earth did not need to be attacked or destroyed. It only needed to be left to itself for one morning. That is how fragile the very greatest human thing turns out to be, the instant the hand of God comes off of it. Which brings me to the part of all this that I did not understand for most of my life, and that permanently changed the way I read every empire that comes after it in the Bible. This was never, at bottom, a story about whether Nimrod was strong. He was strong. The record says so plainly and without sarcasm. Mighty, a builder, a founder of cities, the first true king the world had ever seen. The story is about a different thing entirely. It is about the fact that even the single strongest man who ever lived was standing the entire time, from his first breath to his last, underneath a limit he did not set, could not move, and never even saw. Remember the bow God hung in the cloud after the flood? That bow was a boundary. It was heaven's own line drawn in color across the sky, a standing promise that said, "This far and no farther will I let the pride and violence of men run before I answer it." Nimrod built his tower straight up into that very sky, and never once understood that the God who owned their sky had already fixed the outer edge of his kingdom before the first brick was ever fired in the kiln. And every empire since Nimrod has been building under that same bow, inside that same fixed limit, whether it ever bothers to look up and see the line or not. And Babel did not stay buried on that plane, which is the part that ought to sit you straight up in your chair, because the city rose again. On the very same ground, in the very same country between the two rivers, the descendants of the scattered came back generations later and built once more. And they gave it the name the whole world would come to fear, Babylon. And Babylon became the empire that burned Jerusalem to the ground, that tore down the temple of God, that carried his covenant people off in chains across the desert, and that set itself up one more time as the golden throne of the whole earth. The same spirit, exactly the same plane, the same reach for a name that heaven itself would be forced to reckon with. Nimrod's tower was never a single isolated event. It was the first draft of a pattern, and that pattern has been repeating itself ever since. Babylon, and then every proud kingdom after Babylon, each one building higher than the last, each one dead certain that it will finally be the one that lasts forever, and each one, without a single exception in all of history, coming down into the dust. And the record follows that one thread all the way to the last book of your Bible, when the Apostle John, exiled on the rock island of Patmos, was shown the final proud kingdom that sets itself against God at the end of the age, the whole vast system of human glory that says, just like the men on the plain, we are enough, we need no heaven. He did not have to invent a name for it. He reached all the way back across the centuries and picked up Nimrod's. He called it Babylon, and he wrote its future in words that could have been carved over the abandoned tower. Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. The first empire and the last empire share one single name, because underneath the brick they share one single heart. And because of that heart, they share one single ending. Every tower that men have ever raised to their own glory is already leaning from the day of its first stone toward the very same rubble. So what finally became of the first empire on earth? It became the warning God stamped across the top of every empire that would ever follow it. And I will tell you plainly, before we close, why I stand at a dark and frightening ruin like this. 1. And make a film out of it, because it is not meant to leave you afraid, and it never was. It is meant to turn you clean around. When you stand at the foot of what is left of Nimrod's ambition, and you feel in your chest just how small the mightiest, man's mightiest work turned out to be under the hand of God, the fear that rises in you does not drive you away from him. It drives you straight toward him. It is honestly the most bracing comfort I know anywhere in Scripture, that there is a fixed limit set on every Nimrod who will ever rise, in any age, including our own, that no tower has ever once stood forever, that the same God who came down at Babel still sets the outer edge of every kingdom on the earth, including the loud and frightening ones we read about in the news today. The terror of the tower is real. I will not talk you out of it, but it points every single time, all the way home. I told you at the start that I have stood on that ground. Let me leave you there, because it is where this whole story finally landed on me, and would not let go. A low mound out in the desert, the wind moving steady across it, broken brick underfoot, for as far as a man can walk in any direction. And somewhere down beneath your own boots, the buried foundation of the first tower a human being ever raised to make himself immortal. There is no crown there now, no kingdom, no throne, no name carved into anything that anyone alive can still read. Just the dust of a very great ambition, and over the top of it, the wide, patient quiet of a God who was never in any hurry about it at all, and never once needed to be. And I stood in that quiet, and I thought about my own small handful of years, and about everything I have ever tried to build in my life that had my name on it instead of his. It is a sobering place for a man to stand, because I will be honest with you, the way I have tried to be honest all the way through. Every one of us has a little of Nimrod down in us somewhere. The pull to make a name, to raise something, anything, that says I was here, I mattered, and to raise it on our own terms and by our own two hands. Babel is not only his story. Read it honestly in the plain light of your own heart, and it is the human story. It is my story. And unless you are a great deal further along than I am, some corner of it is yours. But there is another tower in the Scriptures, and I want to end you on it, because the Word sets it there deliberately, on purpose, in direct answer to this one. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 10, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous runneth into it, and is safe." Do you see what the record is doing to you? Nimrod built a tower in order to make himself a name, and the tower fell, and the name became a byword for confusion. But God's name is itself the tower, already standing, already higher than any ziggurat, needing no brick, no bitumen, no kiln, and no scattered labor of frightened men. You do not build it. You could not build it. You run into it. One tower a man raises with his own hands, and then watches collapse under the weight of his own pride. One tower a man simply enters, and is safe inside forever. The whole of human history, when you stand back far enough to see it, is the difference between those two towers. So here is the one thing I would ask of you before you go tonight. Take your Bible down and read Genesis chapter 10 and chapter 11, slowly the way we just read them together, and watch how much is packed into those few plain verses that most of us have skimmed past our entire lives. Then come back here and tell me down in the comments what you saw in it that you had never once noticed before. I read this account for 40 years before it finally opened up for me, so I know past any doubt that it can open up for you too. Read the manuscript, not the movie. And remember the one name that has outlived every empire that ever tried to erase it. Not Babel, the name that fell, but the name of the Lord, the strong tower that has never once, in all the ages of the world, come down. One last word before you go. Everything you heard tonight, I read from Scripture. I am not summoning anything, and I am not here to make you afraid of the dark. I am here to make you stand in awe of the God who rules it. I quote the King James Version, unless I say otherwise. The shadow is real, but it is not the last word. He is